Alright guys, how's it going? Fishing California with EBA. Today we're talking all about fishing, like always. We want to talk about RoboWorm. So you guys are out there, I know everybody's got a RoboWorm or a plastic worm, we're going to talk about RoboWorms today. I want to talk about the best ways to fish a RoboWorm. So in my experience, fishing something is great, catching something on, when you're fishing is the best. So I want to talk to you guys about the most productive methods I've used for the last 15 to 17 years fishing RoboWorms, particularly that brand, RoboWorms. Now, I've also tried Zooms and all kinds of, the Zoom has a trick worm, and there's a bunch of brands that have their staple worms. Today, we're going to focus on the RoboWorm, and we're going to do that because, it's widespread. Everybody's selling RoboWorms. Everybody's usually, had some experience. So let's talk about it. What are the best ways, the most productive ways, RoboWorms for me? And I've had some phenomenal days, so double digits for largemouth. And what I would say, drop shot, as everybody knows, drop shotting is a key way to catch them. However, constantly changing your leader, so how high up how long that tag is to that split shot on your drop shot rig. Sometimes, changing that. Some people like to rock it, shorter than others. Some people like to go long. What I've noticed is there's certain seasons that they're holding tighter or, holding up higher, more offshore, maybe more suspended in a lot of situations. I'll go with 2 and 3 foot leaders generally in those situations. But what I've noticed is drop shotting a RoboWorm is going to catch you a lot of fish. Adjusting that tag I've talked about is going to be the key between going out there one day and going, they're just not quite, adjust that. You might be able to get 2 more fish in that same spot on the bank or in the boat, whatever. You might be able to just hook into a monster fish, and sometimes those small details. So that's the first thing, and you already knew kind of drop shotting is key. Obviously, wacky rigging, weightless wacky rigging with very small hooks, throwing RoboWorms into highly matted, grassy, thick vegetation type areas, high cover structure type areas where it's easy to snag up your rig. I like to go with something where it's kind of it's a stitched method. Bill Murphy taught me this method. Thank you. The Pursuit of Trophy Bass is a book he wrote where he talks about this method, stitching the bait with a very he was doing it in a similar way, but I just applied that to the Robo. I'm going super small on the hook, and I'm stitching that hook into the plastic. So when I actually get bit is when I set the hook, and usually at that point it's a lot of fun. You're usually gonna get some good fish. However, the positioning of where you wacky rig this hook is very important. So sometimes I like to do an offset of 40-60, sometimes I like 70-30, and other times I like 80-20. And this is basically the percentage of the offset. So 80-20, for example, would be 20%, 1/5 exactly. So if 1/5 of the length of that bait down off the head, I'm gonna go ahead and insert that hook right there in the head. That's going to make that worm move. Let's just say the head itself, the way it moves in the water, the way it drops because of the hook being attached there, it seems to swing. I like to rig it like that in the fall, especially in the summer, because it swings head first, and it's weightless, so it's extremely slow rate of fall. The hook is basically embedded in the worm, it's invisible, and they just grab it. I mean, you're going to have a lot of bites, you're going to have a lot of misses, but you're going to catch a lot of fish. You're not going to do that if you have it rigged in other ways. A lot of people are hot on Texas rigging a RoboWorm, and there's nothing wrong with Texas rigging a RoboWorm. It does catch you fish, it does. It's not my favorite way. Like traditional, get your darter head, get your bullet head, get whatever type of weight you want, and then Texas rig it, and then have your worm. I'm not a fan of that concept. I'm more of a straight shank hook kind of guy when I do that. So I want to bring out the straight shank hook, talk about that, something that you need to be using. Don't be using these EWG offset wide gap type hooks on these worms. I mean, you need a straight shank, and even on other baits, I mean, you want to try to go straight shank. Why? I'll tell you why. One reason, hookup ratio. You're going to get about a 20% more hookup ratio on those straight shanks. You're just going to hook more fish. In general, the offsets, they do have a disadvantage as there's only so much of a gap for that mouth of that bass to grab onto and get it to penetrate, whereas, you know, if you leave the whole thing exposed or available, bam, you got a higher percentage of actually hooking the fish. Even if that fish has the bait all the way in its mouth, you know, you're going to have less hookups with the offset wide gap. So keep that in mind. Straight shank is king in most situations like that. Now, the offset do have their they do have their strengths for certain situations. What else I want to focus on, you know, one of my favorite ways to fish a RoboWorm is actually as a trailer. I like to use a Robo, especially the 6-inch Robo, on a chatter or a bladed jig or a spinnerbait or a buzz bait type of deal. And the reason I like to do that is, you know, 6 inches allows me a slightly decent profile. I can kind of pick and choose how much I want to cut, and so a lot of times I'm going to cut some of that thicker side off, obviously, up to 2 inches depending on what I'm throwing. So it depends on if it's a 1/2 ounce big profile, if we're talking 1/8 or 1/6 or 1/10 type profiles, baits where it's much smaller, more compact, I'm going to cut it down more. But most importantly, I want to talk to you about using it as a trailer because it's phenomenal. It's subtle. I like to use it in when the water's colder. So when you have colder water conditions that you might be early pre-spawn type area, or it might be just that last transition between winter, fall and winter. And then what I like to do is that subtle movement. And a lot of times, you know, what people don't do is even in the warmer weather, you know, spring, even like all the way through that warm weather in the summer, I really like to cut the back of that tail. So 1 inch gives you a look and slight separation, different, basically a different look. But I really like to split that tail once I rig the trailer, that Robo. At the end of the tail, I like to split it. I like to stay very carefully with the, there is a line on the plastic bait where it was actually made. I follow that line and I cut it 1 inches to 3 inches. Generally 1, 2, and 3 inches, but most of the time I'd say 1 and 3. Why? Because the 1 inch gives you a much different look, and the 3 inch actually, you know, it starts to really separate, you know, the split of that tail. And, you know, I was a big fan of, you know, Zoom split tails for a long time. I like their split tails. However, once I started modifying these RoboWorms on the back of those different rigs I mentioned, spinner baits, buzz baits, chatter baits, things of that nature, bladed jigs, I was just shocked at what the fish wanted. So sometimes there's like what I think and what maybe you think, and the fish, sometimes what they want is all that's gonna, you know, matter. I found that they really like that. So one other way, oh my, one other way I really like to fish these RoboWorms is I'm really big on bottom contact sometimes at certain times of the year, you know, just being able to kind of, so what I like to do is pretty much a mushroom stand-up type jig head, shaky head type thing. I like to do that with it. I like to have a shaky head or a stand-up or a mushroom, where something where I'm getting, you know, I'm like I just described, something where the bait's somewhat standing up or is standing up, or that shaky head. But in general, you know, it's that shaky head presentation, catches a lot of bass, catches big bass. All these techniques catch a lot of bass, big bass that I've mentioned. And I can't tell you, sometimes the fish aren't hungry, sometimes they're not hungry, but this rig entices fish. It triggers bites, and you know, obviously, you guessed it, you're shaking the bait sometimes, but just kind of irritating them, you know. For me, I look at it like creating a reaction. You're creating a reaction. How you get that reaction for me, depending on how desperate I am, I'm willing to do anything to get that reaction almost. However, definitely not going to focus on bedding fish that much. I'm not going to focus on that during the spawn as much if I know there's that going on. However, I can't tell you how many fish I've caught with this technique. And a lot of the time, what I really like to do, excuse me, is I like to fish RoboWorms. So I thought I'd do this video for you guys and break down my favorite ways, basically, that have caught me the biggest, some of the biggest fish that I've caught ever. And numbers, just number days, 30 fish, 40 fish, 50 fish days constantly on Robos. So, I mean, that's good days of fishing to me. California, I would say get yourself a RoboWorm. Try some of the things I've talked about. Obviously, there's different styles of RoboWorms as well. You've got the curly tail, you've got the straight tail, you've got some other newer versions I'm not too fond of. I like the curly tail as well. You know, so let's really go ahead and get out there, fish, catch some big ones. We appreciate you guys watching. Stay tuned. Thanks. Appreciate you.